Welcome back to this tutorial series on building the classic card game Solitaire with Phaser 3. If you missed the previous videos, there'll be links in the video description to the source code up to this point, as well as the complete source code for this video. There'll also be a link to the previous videos if you'd like to catch up, so let's get started. Alright, so with those last changes, that actually wraps up our core logic for our Solitaire class. And so with the logic we have here, we should now be able to play a full game of Solitaire, but in order to actually see it in our game scene, we need to go ahead and update a few of our methods here to actually have the correct frame for our cards so we can play out our game. So to get started with these changes, let's go ahead and jump into our game scene, and the first method we're going to go ahead and take a look at is going to be our create draw pile. Alright, so currently in our event listener for our pointer down event, for when we click on our draw pile, we're just updating the frames in our discard pile to match our card back frame. Instead, what we're going to want to do now is first we're going to go ahead and add a safeguard to make sure we have no cards in either our draw or discard pile. If we don't have any cards available, we won't actually do anything. And so eventually we'll get to this state as we're moving all of the cards from our discard pile to our other piles in our game. And so next, we'll add a check to see if our draw pile is actually empty, and if it is, we'll need to shuffle back in our discard pile cards, and so this is what we'll start calling in our methods from our Solitaire class. Finally, if we do draw a new card, we need to update our discard pile card to actually have the correct frame based on the card we draw from our Solitaire class. So to get started with these changes, what we'll do is let's come down to our event handler for our pointer down event. And first, let's go ahead and do our safeguard. So what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and reference our Solitaire class. So if our Solitaire instance, if our draw pile dot length is equal to 0, and our Solitaire instance, our discard pile dot length is also equal to 0, then we want to go ahead and just return. We don't need to do anything with our click event. Next, we'll want to make sure if we have no cards in our draw pile, then we need to go ahead and do our shuffle logic. So what we'll do is we'll do if our Solitaire instance, our draw pile dot length is equal to 0. Now what we want to go ahead and do is we need to call our shuffle discard pile method. So we'll do this, our Solitaire shuffle discard pile. Next, we'll want to go ahead and update our game state to reflect this. And so we'll need to take all of our discard piles and we want to go ahead and make them not visible. So as we're drawing our cards, we make our card image game objects visible. We'll want to go ahead and hide these after we shuffle. And so to go ahead and do that, let's go ahead and reference our discard pile cards. And so for each of the cards in our array, we'll have our card. And we want to go ahead and just call the set visible method, and we'll go ahead and set them equal to false. All right, so then finally what we'll want to do is we'll need to update the state that represents our draw pile. So as we're drawing cards, eventually once we run out, there'll be no cards visible in our draw pile, and now we want to go ahead and update to actually show how many cards we currently have. And so what we'll do is we'll do this. Let's call a private method, and we'll do show cards in draw pile. And then we'll go ahead and return early. And so what we'll do is let's go ahead and add this method to the bottom of our class. And so we won't return anything from this method. And for now, I'm just going to place a to-do and we'll come back to this. And so what we'll do is let's come back up to our code for our draw pile. All right, so what we'll want to do is if we do have cards we can draw, we want to go ahead and call our draw card method. And so we'll go ahead and do this. We'll do our Solitaire instance and we'll call our draw card method. After we do that, we're going to want to go ahead and update our draw pile. And so we're just going to do the same logic we did here. All right, and then after we do that, now we actually want to go ahead and update the frames on our cards. And so for our bottom card, we will just use the frame of our top card and we'll make it visible based on that top card as well. Next, for our top card, what we want to go ahead and do is we want to grab a reference to the top card in our discard pile and then use that frame for making this card visible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new variable, do const card will be equal to this, our Solitaire instance, our discard pile, and now we want to grab our top card, so we'll use the length of this. So we'll do our discard pile length, and we'll subtract 1. And so now we have a reference to our card instance, and so instead of doing our card back frame, now we need to figure out which frame we need to use based on this card. And so to do that logic, we'll also make a new method, and so we'll do get card frame, and then we'll pass in our card instance. So what we'll do is let's copy that method, we'll come to the bottom of our code, and we'll add in that private method. And so for this, we want to return a number, which represents the frame we want to go ahead and add. All right, so for our argument, we'll select one argument. I'm just going to call this data. And so for this, it's going to be a card instance, or it's going to be a foundation pile. And so for this method, we're going to actually reuse it for when we're trying to update our frames in our foundation piles. And so we'll have two different types we'll need to support. And so what we're going to want to do for this method all we're going to do is we're going to reference our suit frames variable. And so on this object, we'll pass in our suit that is on our variable that we pass in. So if it is a card or a foundation pile, we do have a property called suit. And so then that's going to grab that starting frame from our suit frames object. So then what we can do is now we can use the value property on our card or our foundation pile. Then we go ahead and subtract 1. And so what this is going to do is in our suit frames object, once we pass one of our suits, this will be our starting frame. And so let's say if I have the ace of clubs, because the value on our ace is 1, once we subtract 1, we'll go to our starting frame of 0. If I have the 5 of clubs, we would go ahead and start at index 0, so it's really 4 would be the index we want. All right, so then what we'll do is let's come back to our show cards and draw pile method. And so now what we want to do in this method is we want to just check to see how many cards we have available in our draw pile, and then we'll update the number of cards here to match that. And so basically if we have 2 cards in our draw pile, we only want 2 of these cards to be visible. If we have 1 card, we only want 1 card to be visible. If we have 3 or more, then we show all 3 cards. And so to go ahead and do that check, what we'll do is let's make a new variable, do const number of cards to show. We're going to set this equal to math.min. And so what we'll do is we'll reference our draw pile length. So let's grab our solitaire instance, our draw pile, and we'll grab our length property, and we'll compare it with 3. And so what this will do is which of these 2 is the minimum value, we'll use that. And so if we have 3 or more cards in our draw pile, then we'll choose 3. If we have 2 or 1 or 0, then we'll use that number. So now what we'll do is based on that number, we want to go ahead and use the setVisible method to hide our card. So what we'll do is let's reference our draw pile cards. And then for each of our cards, we'll have our card and then we'll have our card index. All right, so what we'll do is we'll just use our card index and we're going to compare that to the number of cards we have to show. And if it's less than that, then we'll go ahead and make it visible. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a variable. We'll do const, we'll do show card. And so we're going to set it equal to our card index if it's actually less than our number of cards to show. And then we'll do card, we'll do set visible, and it'll be based on show card. All right, so what we're doing here is because for our indexes, it's going to be 0, 1, and 2. If we have to show 1 card, we'd only want to show our index 0. If we want to show 2 cards, we want to show indexes 0 and 1. And so that's how our logic is working here. All right, so if we save our changes, we should be able to test our new draw card pile logic. And so as soon as we draw a card, we'll see right away that now our discard pile shows the card that we drew. And so we have our 4 of spades. If we draw our next card, we now have the king of clubs, and we see the card below it is our 4 of spades. If we do that again, now our bottom card should match our top card. And now if we keep drawing, what should happen is as we go through our cards, eventually we should get to the state where we remove a card. As soon as we remove that last card, now we have no more cards in our draw pile. As soon as we click one more time, our cards are now shuffled back in, and now our discard pile cards are empty. And if we draw our top card, we'll see our 4, and then we'll see our king again. Nice. All right, so next up, what we'll want to do is we'll need to update our logic from when we create our tableau piles. So currently, when we create our cards, all of them are currently showing the back of our card. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to modify this logic to use our actual game state. And if our card is face up, then we'll use the appropriate frame. And we'll use that to determine if our card should be draggable. If our card is face down, then we won't actually allow it to be draggable. So what we'll do is let's jump down to our create tableau piles method. And we're going to go ahead and update this to use more of our game state. And so we're not going to rely on our for loop here, where we do a hard code to 7. We're actually going to use the actual piles that exist on our solitaire instance. And so what we'll do is after we create our tableau containers, let's go ahead and update our for loop. And what we're going to do is we're going to reference our solitaire instance. And we'll go ahead and grab our tableau piles, and now we're going to go ahead and do for each. And so for each of our piles, we'll have a pile, and then we'll have our pile index. And now what we'll want to do is we'll go ahead and create our Tableau container and add that to our Tableau containers array. And so I'm just going to copy this logic here. We'll go ahead and paste it. But instead of using I, we want to go ahead and use our pile index. And so after we create that container, now we want to go ahead and create our card image game objects. And so instead of doing a for loop, we're going to go ahead and reference the pile that was provided. And so for each card in our pile, we'll use that to create our card. And so what we'll do is we'll do for each. And so in here, we'll have our card, and then we'll have our card index. And so now what we'll do is we want to go ahead and create our card game objects. We're just going to copy these lines of code here. We'll go ahead and paste it. And so now, instead of using J, we want to go ahead and use our card index from our inner loop. And then for here, we want to go ahead and use our card index and then our pile index. And so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and make them not draggable by default, and then we'll go ahead and add them to our container. Once we do that, we'll use the actual card instance, and we're going to see if that card's actually face up. If the card is face up, now we'll make it draggable, and we'll go ahead and update our frame. And so to make it draggable, we'll reference our input plugin, and then we'll call set draggable. And now we'll go ahead and pass in our existing phaser game object. So we'll do our card game object. And now to update our frame, we want to go ahead and do our card game object. We'll go ahead and call set frame. And now what we'll do is we'll use that method that we just created for getting that frame. And so we'll do this, get card frame, and we'll pass in our card instance. So then what we'll do is let's get rid of our other for loop here, since we should no longer need it. All right, so go ahead and save. Oh, it looks like we have an error. Yeah, so let's go ahead and come up to our create method. What we'll want to do is first, we need to make sure we actually have our Solitaire game instance before we call our methods for creating our game objects. And this is just because now we're referencing the state here. We need to make sure this exists. And so once we save, we should now see our game refreshes. And now in our tableau piles, we now see our actual cards being visible. If we try moving one of our cards that are face down, we can't. But if we click one of our cards here, we can go ahead and move them around. All right, so for our next change, we need to go ahead and update some logic in our update card game objects in our discard pile method. So currently, when we go ahead and try to update our bottom card, we're just making it not visible when we run this logic. Instead, this needs to be based on our game state. And so what we're going to want to go ahead and do is let's go ahead and replace this code. We want to go ahead and grab a reference to our second to last discard pile card, and we'll use that to set our state. And so what we'll do is we'll do const, we'll do our discard pile card. We're going to set it equal to our solitaire instance. Let's grab our discard pile. And now we want to go ahead and grab our length. We'll go ahead and grab our solitaire instance, our discard pile, and we'll grab our length property, and we'll go ahead and subtract 2. And so this is going to give us the second to last card in the stack. And now we can do, if it's undefined, then we know this needs to be not visible. If it is defined, now we'll go ahead and update our frame. And so what we'll do is do if our discard pile card is undefined, we'll run our existing logic. Otherwise, we want to go ahead and make it visible, and we'll go ahead and update our frame. And so we'll go ahead and set visible to be true. And now we want to go ahead and update our frame, and so we'll do set frame. And we want this to use our method that we created. So this get card frame, and we'll pass in our discard pile card. And so if we want to go ahead and test this logic, let's go ahead and add a few cards to our discard pile till we find one we can play. All right, so if we go ahead and try moving our ace down to our, looks like we have a bug. If we jump over to our solitaire instance, yeah, so in our play discard pile card to tableau method, we return false at the end. This actually needs to be true. So let's go ahead and try doing another test. So let's find a card we can play to our tableau. Okay, so we have this Knight of Hearts. If we play it, we now play it on top of our 10, and now we'll see that we have our 7 under our queen. Nice. All right, so next up, now we need to go ahead and update our foundation piles to actually show our card game objects frame when we add our card. And so what we'll go ahead and do is let's go to our method for we do our update foundation piles. And so right now we just have a to do. And so what we're going to want to do is we'll just want to update this based on our game state. So we're just going to reference our solitaire instance. Let's grab our foundation piles, and now for each pile, let's go ahead and grab a reference to our pile, and so this will be our foundation pile. Then we'll have our pile index, and this will be a number. And now what we can do is if our pile's value is equal to 0, we don't actually need to do anything because we're not going to show any cards, and we'll have our background that we currently have. If the value does not equal 0, now we just want to go ahead and update our frame based on that value. And so we'll have our foundation pile cards, we'll pass in our pile index, and then we'll call set visible, and we'll go ahead and set this to be true. And now we want to go ahead and call set frame. And now for our frame, we'll go ahead and use our method, get card frame, and we'll go ahead and pass in our pile that we're currently iterating on. All right, so now if we can go ahead and find a card we can play to one of our foundation piles. So now if we take our ace of spades, if we add it, we'll see our game state now updates to show our ace is now here. All right, so for our last code change, we just need to update our logic and our handle revealing new tableau cards method. So it's going to get rid of our to do. All right, so in this method, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to check to see if we need to actually flip over the next card in our tableau pile that was just moved. To do this, we'll call our flip top tableau card method on our Solitaire class. And if we get back true, we know a card was flipped over. So now we need to go ahead and update our relevant image game object to have the correct frame. And we need to make it draggable as well because now the player can actually interact with it. So to go ahead and make these changes, what we'll do is let's go ahead and make a new variable, do const, and we'll do flip tableau card. We'll set it equal to this, our solitaire instance, and then we'll go ahead and call our flip top tableau card method. And so we'll go ahead and pass in our tableau pile index. And so if this is true, then we want to go ahead and do our logic. And so what we'll do is first, we need to go ahead and grab a reference to our tableau pile and then our tableau card from that pile. So do const, we'll do tableau pile is equal to our solitaire instance. We'll grab our tableau piles, and we'll use our tableau pile index. Next, for our card, we'll do tableau card is equal to our tableau pile, and we're going to grab that last card. We'll do our tableau pile dot length -1. All right, so now we have a reference to our card instance. We need to grab a reference to our phaser image game object. So let's make a new variable. We'll do const card game object is going to be equal to, we need to reference our tableau containers. And now we want to use our index so we can grab our correct container. And now we need to go ahead and use the getat method. And we know we're going to get back a phaser game objects image for our type. All right, and now we just need to go ahead and grab the last card from our container. And so what we'll do is we'll use our tableau pile dot length, and we'll go ahead and subtract 1. All right, so now we have a reference to our phaser image game object. We just need to go ahead and call set frame to update our frame. And so what we'll do is we'll do our card game object set frame. And now we'll go ahead and use our get card frame method. And we'll pass in our tableau card instance. So our actual card instance from our solitaire class. And that's going to give us our frame. And now we just need to go ahead and make our card draggable. So let's reference our input plugin. We're going to call the set draggable method. And now we can pass in our existing game object, and we'll pass in our card game object. All right, so with those last changes, we should now be able to test our game end to end. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to turn off debug just so it's a little bit easier to see. And now what we should be able to do is if we try playing our card game, let's place our ace up on our foundation. Ooh, we'll do the same thing with our 2. We'll do our 3 and our 4. All right, so far so good. So if we keep playing, we should be able to finish up our game. All right, with that brings this video to an end. In our next video, we'll continue working on our solitaire game, and we're going to go ahead and wrap up our series, and we're going to focus on adding in support for things like our title scene, some scene transitions, and other UI elements like that. So as a reminder, there's a link in the description of the video to complete source code for this video, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did enjoy the video, please consider liking the video and hitting the bell icon to be notified when the next video in the series is released. For more great Phaser 3 content, please see the links on your screen now.